we wanted to kind of go through who the Bills have on their squad right now and name some of those guys, some of those B-plus players who could have career seasons this year that could help push the Bills over the hump and get to that Super Bowl appearance. But first, to kind of lay out who the B-plus players are, we want to cover who the A players are. And first of all, too, why did you like that point from Kevin Clark? Because it's one that I don't know if I have heard it before, but it's a really great point to make, because if you want to make it to a Super Bowl, if you want to be that team that can beat just about anybody, you have to get the most out of everybody on your roster, and you probably need to get a little bit more out of those B-plus guys.
Well, yeah, I mean, football is the ultimate team game, and every team has stars. If we're comparing the Bills and contrasting them to the Chiefs and the Bengals, they have the superstar quarterbacks. They have the elite wide receivers. It really does come down to those middle-of-the-road players. And like I said yesterday, how good your roster is, to me, is how good is your worst player.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's kind of saying your players who are solid, can they become those Pro Bowl or maybe even all-pro caliber type players? Matt Milano, to me, is someone that is an A player, by the way, that a few years ago, a lot of people would have said, hey, look, he's a B or a B-plus player. He's moved into that elite realm. I think that is, you know what you're going to get from Patrick Mahomes. You know what you're going to get from Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. How well do those middle-of-the-pack players play? That in those games against the Chiefs, in the Bengals, in the playoffs, whatever teams that the Bills will face in the postseason, that's ultimately what I think it comes down to, because the best players are going to contribute. It's what the middle-of-the-pack players ultimately do.
Okay, so let's cover those A players on this roster. And if you guys want to get involved in the conversation, give us a call here, 803-0550, on who you think some B-plus players are that could play up to maybe an A level this season to help the Bills. So A players, of course, we have Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Von Miller. Who are some other A players in your mind?
Okay, so you listed three. Those are the good ones. I think, and this might be controversial, but given the state of play at the safety position, I still think Micah Hyde coming off the injury and Jordan Poyer are two A safeties. So that's 5 total players. I think when they're together in this Sean McDermott defense, you talked about the OG Bills from the Bean and McDermott era. Those guys were signed in 2017. They know the Sean McDermott system like the back of their hand. I think they are both A players. I also think Matt Milano is an A player. And if you want to go even a little further, I think Tyler Bass is an A player.
I was thinking about that too.
So to me, the Bills have 6 or 7 unquestioned top players at their position. Whether you want to cut it off at top 3, top 5, top 7, I think those 7 to me are A players on this Bills roster.
And you're not just comparing these players to the players on this roster. You're comparing them to
the rest of the league,
the rest of the NFL, and grading them based on the best of other NFL teams.
And this is beyond just what I think. I think if you polled 100 people in the NFL industry, you would get unanimously those 6. Tyler Bass, again, being the specialist. Most likely, he's proven to be one of the best kickers in the league. Those would not be up for question, I don't think, from too many people.
Okay, so we have our A players, so that kind of sets the ceiling for the best on this Bills roster. Who are some B-plus players that you think could have career years, or B players that can play up to a B-plus level this season, is kind of how I also looked at that statement. So do you want to give us a few names?
Yeah, I'll start. And again, to kind of frame this as well, this is players that I think are in the B-plus range that not only could play into the A range, but if they do, it's huge for the Bills in terms of what we just said, that you know what you're getting from your superstars. I'll start with the controversial one. I'll go Tredavius White. I think from 2017 to 2020, he's the All-Pro in 2019 at corner. He would have been an A player. Tears his ACL, takes him a full year to come back, which is a little bit longer than I think most players at a relatively young age, how that happens. Played a little tentatively there in December. I think in the first-round playoff game against the Dolphins, Tredavius White looked like the old Tredavius White. Had a couple pass breakups in that game that I think it was starting to come back for him, but it was too late in the season. It's not out of the realm of possibility whatsoever that Tredavius White plays like that all-pro caliber corner. This is not a 33 or 34-year-old corner. I think there's maybe a little bias with me because I loved him coming out of LSU as a draft analyst. He was always around the football. since he joined the Bills, he's always been around the football, man, zone, down the field, underneath. He's a great tackler. He's had so much ball production. If Tredavius White goes from a B player, and that would really only be because of the injury and how slowly he came back from that injury, facing the likes of Jamar Chase and Keenan Allen and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, the list goes on, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown in Philadelphia. If you get Tredavius White back to be able to lock up and to make plays on teams' number one receivers, that goes a long way for the Bills defense.
Yeah, and we heard from several players and Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane this offseason, and when people were asked about Tredavius White and his recovery process and where he's at now, people said his work ethic this offseason has reached a new level, which I think says a lot. And I said this a few days ago, is because Trey White has always been deemed the guy that's the hardest worker on this roster, the guy that's in the training room all the time, the guy that's on the field before practice begins, the guy that's on the field way after practice begins. And for people to say he's taken it to a new level this offseason, I think says something about him. And you look at him on the field this offseason, Trey White looks shredded, freaking shredded. He looks like he's back to his old self, to his all-pro body makeup. He just looks like a vet out there on the field. He looks confident. I know the pads are not on yet, so you can only judge so much, but I'm really excited to see him in training camp.
Quick story on that. So I mentioned that I had Tredavius White as my number one corner in the 2017 draft class, and this is speaking to his hard work. If you look back at the combine from Tredavius White compared to a lot of the other first and second round corners, he was not one of the best athletes. But watching his film at LSU, he had the most pass breakups, most interceptions. To me, that just said, as a scout, hey, this guy doesn't have a 42-inch vertical. He's not running 4.3, but he's just always around the football, disrupting passing lanes, disrupting those contested catch situations. And I think that is a big reason why early in his NFL career and ever since, he's been so productive with the Bills, because he's willing to put in that hard work from a technical standpoint to be in the right position to make those plays.
I think one player for me that I would put in that B-plus category that could have a career season is Gabe Davis. The expectations on him last season, I think, were a little bit unfair coming off of that playoff performance of 4 touchdowns. He had that ankle injury that he dealt with. I think he can take it to a new level this season for his production. I mean, last year he did have over 800 receiving yards. It's not like he had a bad season at all. He had 48 catches, 836 receiving yards, averaged 17.4 yards per catch, which is a great number. Had 7 touchdowns, which tied a career high that he had in his rookie year. He had those 5 touchdowns in the playoffs in 2021, though. But I think being healthy is step one for a player like Gabe Davis, and then step 2 is not letting those expectations that you had last season get to you. And he's a year older. This wide receiver room is very new, so I think he will be looked at as more of a veteran, even though he's only going into his 4th year. He's going to be looked at as somebody who has been in that room for a few years. So I think that will also just naturally maybe give him a leg up and give him a little bit more confidence, because he is one of few who has been with that room. They also have a new wide receivers coach this year, so it'll be interesting to see if that changes anything with these guys. But I believe Gabe Davis can have a career year. And I believe he's also a player who may be looked at as a B-plus guy right now, but I think he could easily get into that A category depending on the season that he has. He needs to show that consistency. He needs to show that he can be that true number 2 receiver for the Bills and take some attention off of Stephon Diggs at times. I know other players on the roster, maybe Dalton Kincaid can be one of those guys this year too, so that it frees up Stephon Diggs to do what Stephon Diggs can do best this season. So I believe Gabe Davis, like, this is your year, buddy. Go shine.
And this is a perfect segue, because on June 15th, his mom, Alana Davis, tweeted that Gabe Davis was given the Lifter of the Year award by the Bills Strength and Conditioning. So I think that we know about Von Miller, we know about Josh Allen, Tredavius White you mentioned. Gabe Davis is putting in the work as well, and I think for as much as there could be critics out there that he wasn't super consistent, maybe there were injury concerns, I think Gabe Davis is probably the most disappointed of anyone about how inconsistent he played last year. And to speak to Gabe Davis going from B plus into the A range, I'll get really specific with it. I don't think he needs to become this super well-rounded wide receiver who's running routes like Diggs, who's creating after the catch. If he can be just that super dangerous down the field player more frequently in more games, when you have Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox and Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield, the running backs out of the backfield, I think now the Bills, and this speaks to the depth that we discussed at length yesterday, because they have more depth, Gabe Davis doesn't have to do all those things. He has proven down the sideline, getting his feet in bounds, those back shoulder throws that he and Josh Allen have such a good rapport, vertical routes, post routes, the 98-yard touchdown against the Steelers. If he can just become an A player in terms of being a vertical threat, that really opens up a lot more on this offense. And I think he and just how the roster is constructed are positioned to kind of make that jump because they don't have to rely on him so much to be that classic, well-rounded number 2 receiver.
I think one nugget, too, with Gabe Davis before we move on to the next player is he's still a young guy. He can still be molded. He can still be shaped. He can still grow in a lot of ways in his skill set in the NFL. And that's why I brought up a guy like Adam Henry, because he coached Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry in college at LSU and then eventually coached them with the Cleveland Browns when he was there. So I think this is a wide receivers coach that can develop players, and I think Gabe Davis is definitely somebody who can still be developed. So I'm looking forward to seeing what tools he can add to his toolbox this season as well. Who's another player that you would describe as a B-plus guy that could have a career season?
I'm going to go to the defensive side this time. Gregory Russo. I think the fact that the Bills signed Leonard Floyd, that helps him a lot at the beginning of the season. I know Von Miller wants to get out there week 1 for the bright lights of Monday Night Football against the Jets, but it feels like the Bills will take what they've normally done, the precautionary route with an injury that's so vital to a key player. Russo, to me, is kind of the opposite of Trey White. That Trey White hit the ground running in the NFL, was really an A player right away, and now there's kind of some questions about coming off an injury. Is he still an A player? Is he B+? Russo has quietly, I think, become a B+ player.
Yeah.
His rookie year was good after only playing 1 season at the college level, 19 years old. And then last season, he improved. The arrow was pointing up. But once Von Miller went down, we didn't see as much productivity from Gregory Russo. And I think now this year, especially early on without Von Miller and just to have Leonard Floyd across from him, the Bills are going to need him to be that alpha rusher that opposing offensive coordinators and opposing quarterbacks are concerned about. And what's, from a scouting perspective, so interesting about him, he's the most uniquely framed edge rusher in the NFL. 6'7", probably 260, 265 at this point. So from that, offensive tackles are not seeing his style of player every week, where suddenly it's this incredibly long, incredibly tall pass rusher who's gotten stronger in his first 2 seasons and is now really coming into his own, just being a football player. He's played a lot more football than he did in college. So I think Russo, to be that guy who can really strike fear in the opponent's eyes, especially early on, would be, again, huge for the Bills defense when they're facing a lot of really good quarterbacks on the schedule this year.
I know it's easy to say the confidence thing, but I think his confidence is growing too. I mean, you go from someone who played so little in college at the University of Miami to then going into the NFL in a new world and in a new defense. It takes a little bit to get used to it. And you saw him double his sacks in his second season in the NFL, going from 4 his rookie year to 8 in his sophomore season. You also saw him go from 10 quarterback hits to 14 quarterback hits. So you're seeing this trajectory of where he's at, and I hope it's a double-digit number for him this upcoming season. I think he can be that, and I think a healthy Von Miller or a Leonard Floyd on the other side, allows you to do that. A healthy inside of your defensive line, Ed Oliver, who's going to be an impactful player this year, fresh off a new contract, a healthy Jordan Phillips, a Daquan Jones, a Poona Ford. I think all of that helps the guys on the edge be able to get out and work and rush the quarterback. 2 other players that I look at, I'm kind of putting them in the same category just because we don't know what the share is going to look like yet, and we don't know kind of what that position is going to look like in some regard. hard with how they want to use both players is James Cook and Damian Harris. I think these are two guys, and James Cook is definitely a younger guy who still he had a good rookie year. He had some flashes here, but he needs to be more consistent. Damian Harris is definitely somebody who has flashed and who's had a whole lot of rushing touchdowns, especially, short yardage rushing touchdowns. And I think he can be that. Last year when he was with the Patriots, Ramondre Stevenson took up a lot of the carries and everything. So I think he's got a new life here in Buffalo. And so I look at James Cook and I look at Damian Harris. I look at what the offense might need from both of them this season. It's not going to turn into a rushing first offense, an offense that rushes the ball more than they throw the football, because that's not what life is like with a quarterback like Josh Allen. But I think they can be a huge asset and a really big help to this offense. If you can get James Cook lined out wide a little bit, if you can get him in a situation where he's catching some passes, catching some screen passes, lined up in the backfield with his twitch, with his vision, throwing guys off, I think that can help this offense big time. The consistency, you need that there from the rushing offense. That really wasn't there last season, and it's not just because of the running backs. It's not just because of the offensive line. I think it's because of both of those positions. So if they can work together, I think if you can have a rushing offense that you can lean on when you need to, especially at the end of the year, we always talk about that when it gets colder, when you're going to need to run the rock more. If you can do that and just have it work all the time, I know you're going to play some incredible defenses and it may not work on every down, but if you can have a more consistent rushing attack, I think that can do wonders for Josh Allen and what he's asked of doing or not asked of doing this season, when he doesn't have to run it 2 yards into the end zone, because you have a bulldozer like Damian Harris who can take that off of his back.
And you're saying with them, they're like B or B minus players. If they become B plus players, then that's huge for the Bills, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm saying they're more in the B category, not because of what they haven't shown, maybe because of how they are used.
Yes.
You know, I think it's a little bit of what can you do when you're on the field, but also how can you be used? And I think you have to look at both of those things together when you're talking about running backs in Buffalo's offense. So I think when they're on the field, they can play to the best of their ability. I think they can be looked at as B plus players who can be difference makers and who can have career years for the Bills.
Yeah, and they complement each other like perfectly. Like you're talking about thunder and lightning back.
Yeah.
I always go back to Brandon Beane's time in Carolina. Jonathan Stewart, D'Angelo Williams were kind of that type, where one was the really big boulder of a back inside the red zone. The other one was the shiftier player. I think maybe that's what the Bills were going for with that pairing. I have two others, and I'll be quick. You mentioned Ed Oliver. I think it's obvious with him. Is he now complacent because he got his deal, or is he now motivated to show everyone, hey, I got this money. Some people thought it was too much. Me personally, I thought it was exactly about how much he should have been paid, but he needs to prove, hey, I'm worth this money. And if he becomes the player that I think from a pure talent perspective, it looks like he can be, generating more of a push from the inside, helps Rousseau, it helps Leonard Floyd, Von Miller, and would just be big again facing the collection of quarterbacks, a lot of high caliber, most of the best quarterbacks in the league the Bills are facing this year. That would go a long way. The other one is on offense, and it's not Dawson Knox, because I think with Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox doesn't need to become an A player. He doesn't need to be an all-pro tight end. The Bills will get enough production out of that position. It's Deion Dawkins, because Deion Dawkins, to me, I think is unequivocally a B to a B plus player. You could poll people. Maybe some would have him as, a B minus. Some would have him in the A range. I think he's just been rock solid during his time thus far with the Bills. And if you're looking at the Bills' schedule, almost every team they face has not just one, but two really good edge rushers.
That's a great point.
Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Sam Hubbard, and Trey Hendrickson. It's a long list. Max Crosby. The Raiders just drafted Tyree Wilson at number 7 overall. The Chiefs, back-to-back first-rounders at the edge rusher spot. The Jets, back-to-back edge rushers in the first round. So you're not going to be able to shut down both teams' defensive ends every game. But if you can shut down one of them, their elite guy, or at least keep him at bay, and I think Deion Dawkins is obviously the most well-suited to do that, that goes a long way for what your offense can do, how efficient your quarterback is. We all know Josh Allen is amazing off structure, off platform, outside the pocket. That's where a lot of the highlight reel plays come from. but he's still at his best. His passer rating is going to be the highest when he's kept clean inside that pocket. So if Deion Dawkins, if we're talking about him next year, saying, oh, he's an A player now, the Bills will be better offensively than they were last year.
And I think, too, the offensive line as a whole, there's going to be some new faces that are starting this year. There's going to be guys who are healthy starting this year. I'm talking about Spencer Brown here. If they can play up to a different level, if they can bump it up a grade, if they can play like B-plus players this year, if they can have all career years together, that is going to do amazing things for the offense and for Josh Allen. I think it's going to be really hard to touch this offense if you have an offensive line who really plays up to what everybody is hoping they can play to. You invest a lot of money in the offensive line this offseason in Connor McGovern and David Edwards, two guys who have been starters. You have some guys getting back healthy like Ike Bucker. These are players who I don't know who's going to be starting yet, but these are guys who, whether they're starters or whether they're coming in for injured players, if they can all have career years, I think we'll see something different about this offense that we have not seen yet, because at times last year for the offensive line, because of injuries and other things, it was a struggle for them. They were facing some great defensive lines, and they weren't always the healthiest. But those are some of our players that we think can be career players this year, B-plus players who can have career years for the Bills.